right, so we're ready to get going on starting our navigation. The first thing that we need to do is we're going to be leveraging, if we look at our example, we're getting this menu up top, and this is the sample step example that's provided in the homework. Don't worry about the links, they're not going to go anywhere at the moment, and we'll take care of that at a later point. Right now what we're trying to do, what our objective is to get these links up here through an ajax call and then through DOM injection. So basically bringing data into our site through the ajax call and then using JavaScript to actually take that information and put it into our top level navigation. The way we're going to go about that is the first thing we need to do is go into our Dreamweaver, and we can see that we are in step 101-0, which is great. That's our Git view. And what we want to do is we're going to close up this CSS and JS folder, and we're going to make a new folder, and we're going to call that data. We want to get the data into the folder, the JSON into the folder, and so in the lesson there's more information about JSON. For the sake of keeping the video as short as possible, we'll try to refrain from discussing those things too much and have them as outside conversations. But what we do know we want to do is go and get the JSON file. I'm not requiring you to make that file, and the way that we can do that actually is we can come into the homework and menu JSON file, just click on that. It'll take you to the GitHub, might not be specifically right here, although I believe it will be, and it'll bring you to the JSON file. The best thing you can do instead of copying and pasting and potential error is you can view the raw version of the file, which you see it gives you menu.json, and at this point you can just control save, control S, or whatever it is you're going to do, and you can navigate into your 1xx assets, that data folder that we created, and make sure that you don't take the text along. Get rid of that .text. Let me shrink this up. Now just zoom down, it won't let me. Make sure that it's menu.json that you're saving in there. Save it into your folder, and at this point we should be able to go back to Dreamweaver, and if you refresh local files, you should see the JSON file in there, and if you double click on it, we should see the JSON's in there. Awesome. So the JSON file looks good. At this point we have it saved in here, and we can make sure actually just go ahead and apply source formatting, which does a real nice job of kind of tucking it all up and getting it in. Hit save, and we have that out of the way. So now that we have our JSON, we'll move on to our next step. All right, so what we want to do next is we're going to go ahead and we're going to create a file under our JS folder, our assets.js folder. And what that's going to be called is app.js, app.js. And the reason that we're creating this is we want a place to put our JavaScript outside of our index.html file. It gets kind of convoluted and clogged up in there, and if we open it up, we can see all that it's done is created a blank JavaScript file for us. We'll go ahead and save that, and then now that we have this file created, we'll go ahead and open up our index file. Inside of our index file, we have a lot of stuff going on in here, but the one thing that we can see is that we have this this JavaScript. And what this JavaScript is doing is it's basically it's creating a function, which is a block of code that's only executed when it's called. And so we're adding what's called a event listener, and we're saying window on load, go ahead and call this function. So if we go and we quickly take a peek at our current site, our local host, we'll see, if we refresh, we'll see that our header is working, and that's what that JavaScript is doing. It's actually telling it to do that. And so if we go back over here and we take this function, we highlight it all, we control exit, we save. Let's go ahead and put it in our app.js a while. We paste that in there and we hit save. When we go back out and look at our local host, what we'll see is that the header does not work anymore, and that's of course because all that JavaScript has been pulled out of that index page. If we come back to the index page, what we want to do is we want to call this file into our index page. We're going to get rid of those tags that we left behind when we copied the JavaScript over, because at this point we just want to go ahead and we want to put all of our JavaScript in the bottom of the page whenever possible. And we do that so that the page can reload and do what it needs to do. And so if we come down here, and right underneath, we'll go ahead and we'll do it directly below our page. We'll go ahead and we'll put script. So I type in script and then tab, and that gives me the JavaScript tabs. And then I want source, and what I'm going to go after is in assets, the JS folder, and the app.js. And at this point, it's pulling in the app.js. And what we can do is we can, while we're in here, let's go ahead and put a comment in, just explaining. Oops, that needs to be an exclamation point, dash dash. So we'll comment that, and all we're doing with the comment is essentially letting people know what's going on here with this file. We can see we overran a little bit. That's fine if you're kind of anal about things like I can be. When I start getting long lines, what I do is I take my comments and I just make them look like that. I think they look nicer. The problem is a lot of times when you apply source formatting, good, it left it alone. But anyway, at this point, we're now calling in this app.js file, and we can see up here, if we click there, we can see that we're calling it in there, and we can actually come over here and close that, because, well, I like to work out of here. It's a great feature. I don't have multiple files open. I just enjoy it more. But back to the source code. If we look, at this point we are calling this in, and our header should, make sure you save, and our header should work again in our page. Let me turn on inspect. We'll keep console open. I have to remember to keep doing that, and let's put that over here to the right so that we can see it. And let's do a refresh, empty cache, refresh, reload, and there we go. One of the things that you'll probably notice too is we were getting the classy error, and now that we're pulling that JavaScript in at the end of the page, that should actually come up less often because the code that we need for that is being loaded over top of it. So just quickly to reiterate, we've opened up the index.html page. We took the JavaScript that was up here in the head, and we moved it to the app.js file, which is there. Actually, for the video purposes, I'll open the file so we can see which file I'm working in. There's no confusion. While I'm in here, while we're talking about that, we'll go ahead and apply source formatting. We'll clean that up a little bit and save it. Now, because we made a change to that, the best thing we can do is come back out here, clear cache, and do a reload just to make sure we didn't screw anything up. It's always better to know immediately when you have an issue than later down the road. All right. So at this point, I'm going to look at my index again. I'm going to go ahead and apply source formatting on that one more time, just make sure I'm good, no errors. Everything looks great. I can see I'm good down here with no errors. And now we're ready to move on. All right, so now that we're ready to go, we're going to go ahead and we're going to get started. We have our JSON file tucked away here in our data folder and our assets. We have our JavaScript app.js file started and being pulled into index.html, and we are good to go. We're going to use the func init, right? Because the function init is basically, you'll see this a lot in programming where they'll basically call the function init. We could call it anything, but it's about initializing your program. Inside this function, what declares a function is these curly, right, the curly brackets, and if we see that, that's the opening and closing, and a function is really where we just encapsulate some code block to be used at different points. I'm going to go ahead and enter down. I'm going to make some space, and just to make things less complicated and reduce chance for error, what I can see is that this is actually has a function inside of it, and it's a bunch of information and a code block in there. And what I can do with that is I can come up here with this caret and I can just collapse it so that I don't have to look at it anymore, and it gives me a little more room to work. What we're going to start working on right away is we're going to go ahead and we're going to do some Ajax. And in the lesson, there's more information about Ajax. And essentially what we're doing is we're telling it that we want to do this thing called Ajax. And inside of here, it's essentially a predefined function that we're feeding parameters into. And the first parameter that we want to feed into the call is the method, and the method is essentially telling the function when we use it what kind of data, what kind of call we're going to do. And a get is what we normally do when we take a web browser when we reach out. That's normally called a get. The next thing that we're going to do, I'm going to do some copy and paste to keep things moving along here. Is we're going to declare a parameter as well called URL, and we're going to tell it that we're looking for this menu JSON file right inside the data folder, inside the assets folder, as we can see here. And if you notice, behind each method we're putting a comma as well. That's to let it know we're done with that specific key value pair, and we're starting a new one. The next one, we want to tell it that we're going to get JSON back. That's the data type that's going to come back from the call that we do. And then there are two things that we can basically do here. We can do what's called a success, which we'll go ahead and we'll put our success call in. And because we're putting this in, we want to close it off as well. And we can see when we close it off, right, it's being treated just like anything else. And then we also want to do what's called a error. And what this allows us to do is basically handle the way that things come back for us with the JSON call, and be able to make decisions about what to do with that information, how to handle the situation, maybe the JSON file or the information we were calling for was not available. And if you notice, real quick, I want to point out we have a comma behind there, no comma behind there, because that's the end of the information that we want. I'll go ahead and do a quick code, apply source formatting, just to keep things clean. And so for our first Ajax, for our first experience with an Ajax call, what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to say console log, which we're aware of, right? That writes to our console. And if we get the file back, if we get the information back, we're going to say all good. We'll cover this data in a minute, by the way. And if we get a file, if we don't get anything back, if we end up with an error or we don't get information back, what we want to do is we want to know about that as well, and we'll put, let's just put all is not good. That way we can tell. So at this point, we should be able to actually go ahead and execute this. Again, Ajax method, we're telling it to do a get to reach out in the background. This is what we're telling it to get. Go get that. The data type we're going to get back is JSON. If it's successful, go ahead and console log it as all good. If it's not successful, go ahead and console log as all is not good. Save. We'll go out to our file. We have console open over here, and if we do a empty cache and hard reload, what we can see is that we got all is good. So all is good means that it went out and it actually got the file. We can take it a little bit further too as well, and we can go, just as a quick side note, we can actually go in here to our network tab. And if we click on the XHR, we can see this is the file that it brought in. We can see that our request, right, went to localhost and the method was a get like we told it to. A 200 is a good return. We can go and preview the results of what came back, and you can see our JSON file actually came back in. It was turned into an object where we'll be able to access this information through what we call dot notation. And we'll be getting there in our JavaScript. This is the response, basically the raw response, which is just the information that was inside the JSON file as well. All right, so we'll focus more on that as we go. Let's go ahead and let's go back to our JavaScript and continue on in here. All right, so let's briefly talk about what this data, the word data up here inside the function, the parameter, is exactly. Well, as we saw, when we returned that information, when we had that information come back, and we saw that in our network tab, we saw that we got this response back. And what we do with that data function, what we do with that parameter, is we actually capture that data that's returned here in this, and it allows us to pass it inside of our function here. And by doing that, we're able to access that data and start doing things with it. So if I go ahead and I put data, and we'll return that right after the all is good, and we'll hit save. And so this is acting like a variable, right? A container that has information. The response is passed in that information and brought into here. So if I come out to here and I go back to console and I do a cache reload, what I can see is that it returned a JavaScript array. And it's the full menu, right? It's everything that we're looking for is coming back in through this array, and that's essentially our data object. One of the things that we can do is we can get the length, which does not seem like that big of a deal, but honestly, as you'll learn, knowing how the size of something is going to help us with what we can do with it. And so if I go in and I look, and I do a refresh again, I put length on the end of it, you can see that we get undefined. And the reason that we get undefined is because of the fact that when you look at the JSON object, it has a parent, and we're going to look at it in here real quick. It has a parent a menu. Everything is tucked inside. If I collapse menu, everything is pulled inside of menu, right? There's all these menu items are actually inside this menu. It's not collapsing very nicely for me, but it would actually collapse it all. So what we want to do is we actually want to come in and we want to say data, and let's just kind of data dot, let's put menu dot length, and then let's go ahead and let's dump out what that data looks like as well, and just by saying data dot menu. So we're telling it we want to know how long the menu is, and we want to know, we want to see what's inside that menu object. It's just a JavaScript array is what we're looking at. So we'll go ahead and we'll refresh, and the first thing we can see is we get 4, and that was for the 4 was a result of this line, right? The console log data.menu. And then we saw below the data menu returned a JavaScript array. It's an object, and we can see that we have our full menu. For this lesson, we're just going to worry about these top 4, and then we'll worry about digging in and get the other menu items as well. But for now, we're just going to worry about the top 4, and we are set to go. And so at this point, we're going to start trying to go ahead and grab those top 4 items. So we're going to go ahead and take that just one step further. And now that we know that we can get a length, we don't want to run code against something that's non-existent, that's not there, that we don't have information for. And so the first thing we want to do before we do anything or try to do anything with that data is make sure that that data is there. And we'll use what's called a conditional statement. So what I've placed in here is a if statement, a JavaScript if statement that's saying if data menu length, which we know is 4 in this case, is greater than 0. So if it's greater than 0, then I want you to do something for me. And what we can do here is we can actually, at this point, use JavaScript and say, what I want you to do is if it is greater than 0, I want you to take each one. I want you to take data menu, right? That information, data in the menu, and for each one, which would be 4, so for each element as you're going through, and if you look, when we say for each, right, what we're saying to it is essentially, let me close this up. This one, right, the top menus. It's better to look at it out here. Let's go ahead and take a peek out here real quick because I want to make the point of for each, right? So it's looking at these 4, and by the way, if you notice, it starts at 0, not 1, so it's 0, 1, 2, 3. For each one of these objects, one of these buckets, I want you to do something. So when we come back out to our code and we say for each, again, we have to pass information in to the function. And so what this is doing is it'll take each one individually and pass it in, and it'll loop through for each time that there is something there. So what we can do is we can go ahead and we can do a console log, and we can see what that's going to look like. So if we hit save and we go back out and we take a look in our console and we refresh, empty cache and refresh. Oh no, looks like I have an error, and one of the things we can do with that error is I can click right here and I can see where it's telling me that I have an error, and it's telling me it's on line 35. So we'll go ahead, we'll look at line 35, and I need to troubleshoot this, so I'm going to work backwards, and I see that that's good. And for some reason it's not picking up my if statement. So let's go ahead and have a look at it this way. Clean this up real quick. That is working for that. Oh, and I see exactly what my error is. So whenever you include a function inside, right, we can see that we have an opening bracket as well. And so what we have to do is we've got to close that off. And if I hit save, we should see all the red disappear. That's asking me for a semicolon at the end, by the way. So at this point, what's happened is the reason I was getting that error is because it couldn't understand, because it did not see the closing of this actual function here, this for each. And now you can see that it matches up. You can see when I click on that, that matches up. You can see that that matches up. So let's apply source formatting. That cleans everything up. We're good to go. Let's go back out. Let's do a refresh. Empty cache, go look at console, and now we can see that for each kicked in. The way that we can really tell that is we know that after this this information, the next thing that should come is each menu item for each, and we can see love who challenges you. Each one came after that. So at this point, we know we can loop through and we can hit each one of these. And as a matter of fact, the next thing that we'll do is we'll go ahead and we'll, instead of putting out the object, let's go after the username, the menu name, and let's get that to go out. And the way that we can do that is through dot notation. Dot, and then it is, I believe, menu name. And if I hit save at this point, what it's going to do is it's going to jump into that data object, and it's going to look for that key value pair of menu name. And it should put the name out for us. Empty cache, and there we can see love who challenges you, which is awesome. Now we know how to get the menu name. Let's go ahead and let's get the menu link as well. Let's see how we do that. We know that there is inside the object. If we look in the JSON, we know that menu name is love. And menu link is love HTML. And that's how we're accessing it, right, through these key value pairs. And so at this point, if I put menu link and I hit save and I go out, and I take a look and I do a refresh, I can see that I get love, the name, and then I get the link. Who, and then the link. Challenges, and then the link. That's just a response. You don't got to pay attention to that. And you, and then the link. So far so good. So our last step is we want to go ahead and get it up into the navigation. We want to go ahead and tuck it up inside of here. We're going to go ahead and shrink that down a little bit. And one of the things that we can do is we'll go out here to Dreamweaver, we're going to hit save, and we want to look at where we're going to put that information, where we want that information to go. And where we want it to go is up here. We see that we have this nav element, this nav opening and closing nav tag, and we just want to go ahead and tuck it in there. We want to put it in between those two nav tags. We'll get rid of this eventually, but for now we'll just go ahead and we'll append it to that. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to go inside here into our JavaScript, and we're going to use a jQuery, right, append. And so we'll get more into this as we go. This will make more sense to you as we go, but this is basically jQuery, and it's basically saying, hey, I want you to find the nav element, and inside the nav element, I want you to append, right, add to the end this. And so we're basically building an element, an anchor element, a link element, by using a string. We're opening with this. And then we need the double quote because we're putting a link inside of there. And we're going to escape the string and put a plus to concatenate the menu link that we saw here. And then we're going to say we want to add more string. So this is string. And then we're going to say, wait a minute, we want to concatenate more, and we want the name. And then we want to add even more strings. So that's where the plus and the escape, right? Because we're using a single, whenever we use a single quote inside here, it tells it to stop treating it like a string and start treating it like JavaScript. And so at that point, we use plus to say add this, whatever the value of this is. And then, by the way, add more string, which is in between there, and so on and so forth. At this point, I'll hit save. I'm going to go ahead and apply source formatting. It all looks good. Hit save again. I'm going to come out, and I'm going to do a refresh. And at this point, we can see I had to pull out to be able to see it, but we can see that it's actually added our links to the top of the page. So now that we added our links, we appended our links, one of the things we can do is let's go ahead out here and in between the nav tags, and let's just empty them out. So we just basically have an empty nav tag. And if we come back out to our site and we do an empty cache and reload, we can see that our links are working perfectly. So that concludes step 101. We'll go ahead and we'll do a quick recap on what we did in here. We came into our index.html file, and we moved our resize code, our JavaScript code, into a newly created app.js file. And inside there, we put in our function init and our window on load statement, and we basically put all the code that you see into this file that was in the header. And then we went ahead and added our Ajax code. And inside our Ajax code, we basically learned how to grab data from a file and take that data and on a very high level, just go ahead and break it apart and know how when we were successful or we had an error. And in the end, we ended up with our first layer of our menu on the top of the page. At this point, the last thing that we want to do is we want to go ahead and we want to go out to our commander, and we want to take a look. And before I go ahead and do the commit, I want to point out to you, if you look inside here, especially in Dreamweaver, you'll see these colors, and what it's doing is just basically letting you know where code has changed. You can see yellow means it's been modified, green means it's been added, red means that there was a deletion at that point, and we can also see with our files over here that things have changed. And so Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to pull up Commander, and we're going to do a git status, and we're going to see all of the files that have changed. And before we do anything else in here, one last thing we want to do, we want to make sure that we close out all of our files so that we can't accidentally change them and we get a good clean commit. We'll do one more git status. We can see that we have our modified files and our added data, and so we'll go ahead and we'll add those files to the staging area, and we'll do another git status, and now we see our app.js and all the changes that have taken place. And at this point we're going to go ahead and do a git commit. In our commit, we're going to essentially say, and if remember, we're inside branch 101-0. We're going to put moved init function to new app.js file and added ajax call to begin building menu by creating first menu layer. So we'll go ahead and we'll do that commit. We'll add it in there. We'll do another git status, and we will be good to go. Excellent. So in the next video, we'll go ahead and we'll do our merge and our push and things like that.